of March 2026. We're doing the horoscopes for you today. So we're going to be talking about each sign. Please listen to the one that is for your rising sign first and foremost. If you don't have your rising sign, listen to the one with your sun sign. Listen to both. See which works better. Some people say listen to your moon. I don't, but do as you please. At any rate, we are going to be talking about that. Be sure to like our channel, share our channel, do all those good things, and follow us each individually. You can find all our information below. It's a hell of a good time to get a consultation. I'm going to just say that.
Yeah, it
Okay.
is. Agreed.
It really
Yeah.
is. There's so much going on, and it is impacting all of us. And having the perspective of astrology is a huge support. So
Yes.
give some thought to that.
Yeah, and I actually just reworked one of my consultations. I'm calling it a mapping consultation for exactly this reason, to address the outer planets and where they land in your chart. So yeah, so
Yeah.
so check that out. Check what Laurie has out too. She's got recordings as well as consultations,
Yeah.
and get a copy of her book because it's really
Yes.
helpful. If you're a astrologer who's learning more about breaking down charts, it's such a great book for doing that. So definitely recommend it.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Jenny. Thank you. I was looking for a copy of it that I could show people, but
I
I
see
don't
mine
think
over
that.
there. How to Read and Interpret a Birth Chart by Laurie Farrington.
Yeah, it
Okay.
really is a good book. It'll teach you an awful lot about your own birth chart. So, without further ado, let's talk about March.
Yeah, so we've already done a month breakdown for you as a shorter video. If you want to geek out on that, please do. It does kind of go into what we're discussing. And the main thing here is that by the time you watch this video, Saturn and Neptune will have conjuncted in Aries on February 20th. So that's what we're going to talk about, that conjunction, where it lands in your chart, and how Venus then goes into Aries and connects with those, and then the Sun goes into Aries and connects with those. But before we even get to that, there's this gentle focus on Pisces. So there's so much to talk about of the transition between Pisces and Aries. I think we did that in the other video, but we'll do some of that here too. Yeah, if memory serves. Yeah.
Indeed, if
Yes.
memory serves.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, do we want to open up the?
No, no, let's just talk a little bit about Saturn and Neptune. Let's just start with that,
Okay.
and then we'll kind of build some layers.
Okay. Good.
Um, so Lori and I have kind of been discussing this at length, and we have different ways of saying this, but I'm just going to say that Saturn and Neptune in Aries is a lot about what is real and what isn't, you know, and what's the playoff between those two things. So in your life, in other words, what are the things that you've kind of fantasized about or thought maybe could happen? But then with Saturn there, you're being asked to determine, well, can it? Is this realistic? Can I really build upon that dream? Does this really make sense? So that's kind of a super quick version, but I'm gonna
Yeah. I've
have you
been
talk
thinking
about
a
it for a
lot
while.
about, how does it feel, these two together? Like, what
Mhm.
does it feel like? And to me, the overriding sense of it is kind of confusion and yet the need to take action on that confusion. It's like, oh, we've got to do something. And yet, what is it? You think about Neptune's desire to dissolve and Saturn's desire to structure, and they really have such different needs and ways of being. But at this point, as they have finally come together, starting a new cycle between them. This is a cycle of stabilizing our dreams, a cycle of stabilizing our ideals, our visions, and not allowing confusion to override the need for action. The fact that these are happening in Aries is is really telling in terms of we need to take action on our vision, on our dreams, but we have to take it with the serious structure and ability of discernment.
Mhm.
There's yeah, I love it that by the time this comes out, those two will have already started that process. As we're making
Yeah.
this video right now, we are still before that conjunction.
Yeah.
And that conjunction itself is going to really kind of shift the game. We're not
Yes.
going to be able to be lost in dreamland any longer without it kicking our butt if we try to, I think. If we try to stay in dreamland, we're going to get our butts kicked.
So yeah, so to think about this, what's been really interesting, because Saturn and Neptune do conjunct about every 36 years, something like that. And what's really interesting about this particular one is that they've kind of been jockeying in Pisces for a long time. Saturn's been trying to catch up to the slower moving Neptune for quite some time, and they were co-present in Pisces for a long time. And then they both went into Aries, and they almost came together, but not quite last summer. And then they both went back into Pisces. And so having them kind of hover over this sign line between Pisces and Aries, I mean, we are really talking about a new birth, like giving birth to a new dream. The fact that they finally come together, or Saturn finally catches Neptune at 0 Aries, I mean, that is the most vital point of the entire zodiac. I mean, that is the birth of the zodiac. So this really is bringing into view something new we're giving birth to. And there's so many ways that we could talk about what we see on the global stage, what
Mm.
we see in mundane astrology, all the changes we see politically, environmentally, like with the populists, all these things. But the focus of our video here today is to really kind of look at these symbols and bring them into your life and give you a chance to really think about, what are your beliefs? What is your belief system that is represented by Neptune? And by definition, there's some unconsciousness to our beliefs. Like we buy into our beliefs because of our culture, because of our upbringing, because of our family, because of our experiences. And not all of that is conscious.
Mhm.
So there's a real reckoning of like, Neptune in Aries of like, what are my beliefs? And then when you put Saturn to the mix and Saturn kind of catches up, the spell kind of breaks. And Saturn says, all right, well, what's your actual capacity? These are your belief systems, but what can you actually build that is real and tangible, that is you responding to this call to action that the two kind of bring, and then move forwards into something tangible. So that's really like Laurie and I really try to focus on that. And if you have anything at 0 Aries or very close to 0 or the very end of Pisces, or any of the cardinal signs, Capricorn, Libra, Cancer for that matter, this is highly, highly activating, and extra good time to get a consultation.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love it. A call to action around your beliefs and your understanding of what action needs to be taken are really playing together now. I remember first thinking about this combination and having a really hard time kind of bringing it into any sort of reality, but now it seems very clear. It's like there is a call to action. Wherever Saturn moves, we have to um, face the reality. What
Yeah.
are our beliefs? Where are our beliefs unconscious? We have to, yeah, face reality and take responsibility and do the hard work necessary to take action for our true beliefs.
Yeah. And back to we're and just as we're saying, like we're giving birth to something based on that. And so you can think about Saturn as being those labor pains. Saturn is a difficult planet, but it's very potent, and it really is about what you can actually make happen. So and labor pains, just think of this, are just a normal part of birth. They're not, I mean, they're much worse for some people than others, and we have a whole variety of experience, and I don't in any way want to minimize them, especially as someone who has not given birth. But just want to say that that's there can be some resistance and some fear, which are Saturn things. But there's something here about trusting the path, trusting what you've already put into motion. That's part of the whole Aries piece, and kind of saying, okay, this is what's moving forward. So there's something about that kind of trusting your path that you've already kind of laid out. It's part of it.
Yeah. Surrendering to the work that has to be done and
Yeah.
surrendering to, yeah, the work that you have done to prepare for it.
Yeah.
I actually
And
like
then
that you brought that in. Yeah.
yeah, and then Saturn, the final thing I just to say is the commitment.
Mhm.
Saturn brings in the commitment to stay with the work, to keep doing that, to keep, kind of scouring your belief systems. And actually, that's kind of what this video is about, because when Venus leaves Pisces and goes into Aries and contacts these planets, and then the sun does, it really gives you a chance to kind of reckon with and wrestle with these topics, both internally and externally. So, yeah,
All
all
right.
right,
Sounds
let's look at
sounds pretty amazing to me.
It's so straightforward. I can already tell him. Hang on a second here. I gotta fix. Gotta get myself back to the first page of what I was gonna share here, because we're gonna start with the calendar just briefly, just to show you when in time we're talking about. So we're talking about. So here's the month of March. This is what we went through last time in the other video about March, and just there's a lot of Pisces going on. And then the very first thing that moves out of Pisces is Venus entering Aries on the 6th. And then, immediately conjuncting Neptune, and then the next day conjuncting Saturn. So there's that whole, so that really kind of brings in, all right, now you've got to really get in deep with your values. What's happening? We're coming off of an eclipse. So this is a much more internal process.
Yeah, and
The sun. Yeah.
yeah, it's like Venus entering Aries. It really, I love just thinking about she has to shed her beautiful robes and put on her warrior suit. And this is the first time that any planet has conjuncted Neptune first and then Saturn, right?
Mm, hmm.
Right? Because they have changed places. Saturn spent all that time trying to catch up to Neptune. Wait a minute. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. Yes.
They
All that
conjunct, yes.
Saturn catching Neptune. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So now she conjuncts Neptune first and then Saturn. So she has to really develop an understanding of her depths and then face the reality of the work.
Yeah. And Venus, I like to think about Venus. Venus is one of those planets that's kind of an extension of the sun, because it's on the inside orbit between Earth and the sun. So we think about Venus, or I think about it as an extension of your identity, in the sense that you've got to get your clear about your values. What do you value in life? And that's, there's a self-knowledge piece with Venus, of understanding that, because from your values comes, the relationships you create, the way you spend your money, the way you think of yourself, so Venus kind of brings that in. And because it's in the darker half of the moon cycle, this is very much an internal process of, Venus's first encounter with Neptune and Saturn in this order is kind of like, okay, I've got to understand my beliefs, and I got to understand what I actually have capacity for based on my values.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Uh,
Okay. So then we've got the sun following suit. And I love this, the day the sun enters Aries, which is the equinox, the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, and Mercury stations direct that day as well, which is also a pretty auspicious timing thing. But
oh,
we've got,
that's right. Yeah.
yeah.
All planets are direct at that point. So
Oh,
yeah.
yes, that's right. All the planets are direct. Once Mercury stations direct on the 20th, all the planets are direct till some early in May, I think May 6th or 9th, something like that. But the sun enters Aries, leaves all that passive part of Pisces behind. It's time to take action. It enters Aries, and then it conjuncts Neptune, and then it conjuncts Saturn, following that same pattern of what Venus does. And we are off to the races.
Yeah.
We're off
Yes.
to the races. I love
Yeah, I
it.
feel like your foot is on the gas.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and just, to follow, I think the sun, I was thinking about the sun, really shining the light of consciousness on the process. Like Venus gets you to dig inside, and then the sun is like, and we're bringing it up into the daylight. And so then you start seeing the formation of how you're going to respond to the call to action that Saturn and Neptune do, so you're kind of really shining the light of day on that. Like, what's that going to be for you? And so that's really the topic of our horoscope individuals here.
Yep,
Yeah. All right.
absolutely. Okay,
Shall we start doing the individual horoscopes?
sure. Why not?
Okay. All right. Let's start with, of course, Aries.
We could do it different, you
I
know.
know we could, but we're not gonna,
But
especially
we're
not
not
with
gonna. It's easier to just keep the pattern, I guess. Okay, so for those of you with Aries rising, oh man, this is such a personal storyline for you. Who
Mm,
are you? Who do you know yourself to be? What are your beliefs, your values? You're going to be really looking at yourself quite directly here. So, we have to consider that at the beginning of this month, because that's what we're talking about is the month of March. At the beginning of this month, you still are sort of quietly in a process, an internal process of, you know, I don't know. I don't know what you're doing on an internal process, but it's probably a fairly comfortable, soft process of getting to know yourself. Venus is so happy in Pisces, and it's been going through there with the sun through your 12th house. And then when on the 8th, what is it? It's between the 6th and the 8th that
mhm,
Venus goes into Aries and it conjuncts with Neptune and then with Saturn. So Venus here, what is her job? She's been resting. She's been, like Jennie says, she's been at the spa. She's quite happy and content and feels very comfortable. But then all of a sudden, she goes into Aries and she has to step into this warrior goddess role, which is why Jennie has so nicely provided us with that little red warrior woman there. So
yeah.
she goes in and she's like, I really need to understand what my deeper beliefs are and how I can and must take action on them with my own self-expression. This is a point in time where you are really looking at what your responsibility is as an individual in the world, how you are going to grab hold of your own the responsibility of your beliefs.
Mm.
The time of confusion is over. It really is ending as you take those reins. And then when the sun comes in a bit later in the month, like between the 20th and 25th, the sun goes in and does the same process. At that point, you really, it's going to be a lot of ways for you to think about how you're expressing yourself in the world. What do you
Mhm.
want to add, Jennie?
Well, I look at this one and I just think you're just giving birth to a new self. You've
Yes.
been doing all this internal work. You've had Saturn in Pisces for a long time, rooting around in your subconscious, and Neptune for longer. And you've just whatever work you have done in the past few years, like this is a time, a moment of really giving birth to a new you. Because when you think about making the jump from Pisces to Aries, you are coming out of the kind of the nebulousness of everything is one and then emerging as an individual. And so you of all people with Aries rising, this is really a powerful moment of recreating yourself. And so seeing the effects come, you're coming to fruition, basically, like the effects of your work that you've been doing on your deep self, and now everything's going into your first house and you're stepping into a new place where all systems go. And I actually have a person in mind that I'm like, oh wow, who, is opening up a store right around this time period. And I'm like, this is a rebirth for that person, doing something totally different, that has come from at great labors, and a lot of work that's being done behind the scenes. So that's in a nutshell, I think, what this one is showing. And because it's an Aries rising chart, these are the new leaders. This is a leadership role. Your process that you do is going to be showing up in a public way, and you're really kind of setting the tone for other people as well. So that's a weighty responsibility, which is part of Saturn being in your first house.
And
So,
that,
yeah.
yeah, that
Hmm.
and that rebirth has so much to do with your spiritual understanding, for lack of a better way to think about it. Um, yeah, there's so much about what your innate understanding of the world that has to support that new birth, that hard work. You're not just, it's not just Aries. It's got to have that, your beliefs underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do turn to the kind of spiritual warrior idea with
Yeah,
Neptune in the mix. And
yeah.
yeah, this is not just about you, even though you might be the one taking your action, you're carrying all of that education with you, all of that spiritual understanding that you've been developing, and really an understanding about, in my mind, like what compassion is, the importance of it, that you're really being careful about what you're choosing to put yourself out there as. It isn't just a foot on the gas. You've had time to contemplate. So this is
It,
a it's an exciting moment for this for
it
both of
really
us,
is.
I
It's,
think.
yeah,
Yeah.
you are coming out as a spiritual warrior taking action, being
Hmm.
in a leadership position.
Yeah.
Take it on. It's a big one.
Yeah. Pretty cool. All
Yeah.
right. Let's should we move on?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're moving to Taurus rising. So let's see. Let's just start out of the gate here with the fact that we know that Saturn and Neptune, at the time of you watching this video, have already conjuncted in Aries. And for you, that's in your 12th house. So that conjunction between Neptune and Saturn in Aries in your 12th house is really bringing something to the forefront that has been pretty deeply hidden for you. It's really illuminating a sense of self, which for those of you with Taurus rising, that sense of self is kind of buried down deep, and it isn't the easiest to excavate it and set it free. But the good news is for you, Taurus rising, this is a time when you can really do just that. Kind of excavate, what are your belief systems that keep you going? What are your ultimate ideals around spirituality and the collective and like, religion and all of these different things. And then Saturn in there too is saying, and what is actionable for you?
Mhm.
Where can you actually have concrete structures that you can build from those beliefs? So there's it's a deeply internal process for you, but it's very potent because the 12th house is the place where you really grapple with who you are in the collective. So
Mhm.
that's where the Aries is. Now, as we come into March, we have a lot of focus on Pisces. So in the past few weeks, you've really had an opportunity to kind of bathe in the soothing waters of your community where you have Pisces in the 11th house. So this is like, think about where the places that you feel really held, where you feel seen by people, where you feel the sort of these like-hearted souls that you share space with. That's where the focus has been in Pisces season, you kind of being able to nourish yourself in those in that collective space of community. And then as first Venus leaves Pisces and goes into Aries and becomes this like red goddess lady here, is this warrior goddess. Once she kind of is like, all right, I'm feeling good. I've done my self-care. My cup is filled. Like I'm ready to move forward, And so she moves into Aries and kind of launches into that subconscious place represented by your 12th house and immediately makes contact with Neptune and then Saturn. So this is an opportunity for you to really kind of understand from your experiences in community, what are your deeply held values? Like what do you value the most about community, the collective, who you want to connect with? Like what do you feel fierce about that you want to take a stand about? So that's what Venus is kind of doing. She's kind of digging out underneath the hood, like what are these things you really, really care about? It feels super important. And then a little bit later in the month, the sun follows suit. So the sun at the equinox goes into Aries itself and then shines a light on this whole process. So I just think of that as just bringing more of your conscious awareness to the whole process and really saying, what is this line between community and then the collective consciousness? Like what, because there's some kind of rebirth happening here for you. Anyway, I think I've talked long enough. I'm gonna pass it off to Laurie.
There's really a rebirth around your own understanding of your hidden processes.
Mm,
The 12th house is,
mm,
it's a tricky place, I think, to be having this happening because, Saturn going into the 12th house, I always think of it as it's really a powerful time to get to know yourself.
mm,
Saturn itself will be in that house for approximately 2.5 years or so. And you're going to really, Saturn always asks us to take responsibility and look at reality. So, what's the reality of your own inner beliefs? Where they came from? That's a very individual question, whether they came from the culture, your family, or, whatever. But you've got a lot going on in this deep internal place that is unseen. And with this new uh, this new goddess warrior, as she comes in and she shines a light on that, and then the sun does the same, it's really kicks in the reality of this work that you're going to be doing for some time, which is getting to know yourself, getting to trust your inner voice. And
mm.
yeah, you're really looking for this warrior goddess that's been hiding out there. You've got
Yeah.
Aries in the 12th house. You show up in the world, you've got Taurus rising, you look all calm and beautiful and everything is lovely. But behind the scenes in your unconscious, there's a lot of heat. There's a lot of, action that wants to happen. And right now, you're really looking at that because it is within that hidden space that your own internal warrior goddess lives.
Yeah, I think one of the keywords that's coming up for me here is just for people Taurus rising, there's just so much surrender in this process. I mean, there's Pisces in the 11th house, surrender to community, and then you've got 12th house stuff with Aries, surrendering to what you don't know, accepting that you don't know everything and you don't have to have all the answers, and that's okay. And that part of you is always going to be somewhat, subconscious or unconscious that you can't get at, and that's okay. That's a there's something to that. Like you're in flow, so you're not going to know every last detail and be consciously in touch with every last piece of what this is for you. And that's just fine for Taurus
But
rising. That's
but you've
okay.
got to also surrender to the fact that you have to work on it for the
Right.
for the next 2.5 years. Whenever I see Saturn moving into somebody's 12th house, I think, well, I hope they have a therapist. I
Yeah.
always think that, and not like, oh, something's wrong, you need a therapist, but it's such a powerful time to dig under the hood and really learn to understand yourself on a deep, deep level. And with Neptune there also, your understanding yourself on a deep level is going to come through taking action on your beliefs, your spiritual beliefs, really learning from that perspective.
Yeah.
I love this for you. It's such an internal, powerful awakening to your inner warrior goddess. Read, what comes to mind is get that book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. It's an old
Oh,
book,
yeah.
but this would be a beautiful reading for somebody going through this.
Yeah, I agree. Because yeah, it really brings that kind of spirituality plus the kind of warrior to light and really doing it for the collective, superseding. And it's so funny because you're right, Taurus rising wants everything to be the same and stay the same. And like, boy, this is not gonna let you stay the same. This is really like accepting your work in the world. So yeah. All right. Well, we can stop rattling on about that one. Okay, so let's move to Gemini rising.
Okay, so for those of you with Gemini rising, first of all, I want to say I hope you listened to the first part of this video and to the video we did previously. But here for you, what I want to talk about first is the fact that several weeks ago, by the time you're watching this, it's been a little while since Saturn and Neptune finally conjuncted at the very first degree of Aries. So this is your 11th house. The area of life that by the end of the month is going to really be ratcheted up is community. And when I say community, that does not necessarily mean all your group of friends. There may be overlap into friendships, but it's the community that supports you. So you want to think about that as a place where you're having a rebirth. The beginning of the month, we've got a big focus still in Pisces. You may be going along with kind of just resting in kind of an easy place as far as your career goes. And then on the 6th to the 8th, when Venus, which is represented here, thanks to Jennie, by this wonderful little bright red warrior goddess, she looks a little like a devil. Anyway, she's a warrior goddess, Venus, who has been moving through Pisces. And then she goes into Aries and immediately conjuncts both Neptune and Saturn. I keep getting confused which is which comes first, but it's going to hit Neptune first and then Saturn because Saturn is already moved a little bit ahead of Neptune. So this is a time as Venus goes in there that she's really pushing you to be looking at what's going on in your community, really looking to face the reality and do the work necessary to bring your personal warrior goddess into the area of community. What does that mean to you? Yeah, think about that one. The sun also does the same pattern later in the month on the spring equinox, the 20th of March. The sun will move into Aries and immediately, or within the next few days, do the same process of conjuncting with Neptune and then Saturn. So this whole month is really about this necessity to look at what is, let me see, how do I want to say that? We're really bringing kind of the, the difference, that little passageway between Pisces and Aries is not the same as between any other sign and any other sign because Pisces is the last sign in the zodiac. Aries is the first. This is a point of major birth, major change. It's not just a little monthly process. It brings us into this necessity to take action with what we've been learning over these past years. I feel like I've kind of lost the thread, Jennie, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, I'm glad you're just, yeah, bringing it to that idea of, there's a little bit of a birthing process happening here. Like because Pisces is the end and Aries is the beginning, there's a birthing process. And for those of you with Gemini rising, I just keep thinking that there's been this period, just these last few weeks when things have still been in Pisces, of just like kind of resting in the places that feel supportive and nourishing. And for you, those are the public spaces, your professional life is what I'm really thinking about. And what's happening is you're being
Okay.
called to, step into Aries in your 11th house. So, which is much more of a kind of a group leader type of space, is what I keep thinking about. So it might be that you're kind of in one position in your 10th house, which is your most public house. And I typically think of your profession or your work life. Though it can be just public spaces. But there you are in that kind of Pisces and you're being nourished. And then you're, sort of responding to this call to action where you're going to need to step into more of a leadership role, which is so different
Yeah.
than how you kind of are in that Pisces 10th house space. So, but yet these houses, the 10th and 11th, they're very closely related. I mean, in some ways you could think about the 10th house as where you do the, your work life, and then the 11th is the reward of that. The community benefits from your actions in the 10th house, your professional work. So there's a close interplay, of course, between these two houses. So there's something about that. And because Neptune and Saturn are the ones that have already gone into your 11th house, and Venus is illuminating and the sun is illuminating those things, there's a real question about what are your beliefs about yourself, your ability to be a leader. Perhaps you think you're going to be great, and the ego's flying high and you're like, woo, and the Saturn's going to say, well, what's the reality check? Do you know how much responsibility it is to be a leader? And vice versa, where you might be looking at what kind of capacity do I have for this? Maybe you don't want to step in that leadership role, but you're being called to. So what are your resources going to be? What are your spiritual beliefs going to be that help support you? And okay, I need to step into this role. There's an interplay between those two things. And I like to think that Saturn and Neptune are kind of the jockeying of like your ego, like not letting it get too big and being all idealistic and thinking you're going to save the world, but then also not thinking that you're an imposter and you shouldn't be in this role. Like, oh no, 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 no. It's really about taking both of those ends of the spectrum and embracing the Aries there. And Venus gives you the chance to kind of reflect on your values, and then the sun kind of helps you see the path forwards that is going to involve some trust.
Yeah,
So
it really is. It's a call to action. It's a
yeah,
call to taking action on your beliefs for the sake and in the space of community. You're going
yeah,
to be learning a lot about your responsibilities and the actions that are required of you in community over the next couple of years. And it begins here. It really begins here for you to understand what your role is. There is a new role developing for you.
yeah, yeah.
It's really
Okay.
very, very powerful because it really could put you, well, it will in
Yeah.
one manner or another if you take the responsibility that is being presented to you. I mean, obviously, you don't have to. Some people won't, they'll refuse it. But if you're listening to this video, you're probably a relatively conscious person who's thinking about what their responsibilities are in the world. And this is a call to taking responsibility for your beliefs and how you take action in community.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's something about how will you rise to the moment. And also being a Gemini rising person, Gemini is the storyteller, the teacher, the networker, the person who's passing information. So part of your stepping into this in front of the community is those topics. What are you here to teach? What information are you here to pass? Why is it you? And asking yourself those questions because
Yeah.
it's
And
important.
yeah, what is it you're really here to do? I mean, I'm just thinking of someone specific that
Yeah.
I see um, going into a public role, but do they understand that what they're really here to bring to the community? They may think that what they're here to bring to community is one thing, but the reality is that what they're here to bring to the community is actions on behalf of their true beliefs.
Exactly.
It's not to follow somebody else's rule. It's not to,
Yeah.
yeah, it's on their beliefs. That's lovely.
All right. Let's move on to Cancer rising. Okay, so those of you with Cancer rising, let's have a little discussion
First,
about.
tell me who that little red lady is.
I know. Have a little talk about of your horoscope for the month of March. So Laurie wants me to tell you that's Venus. I was going to get to that, but we'll get to that in a minute. So let's just start where I think is a good starting point, which is the idea that Saturn and Neptune here have already conjuncted on February 20th in Aries, and they're very much in your 10th house when the month of March starts. So that's kind of the big thing. So what this brings is the 10th house is the most public house, and often has a lot to say about what is your social contribution. What are you here to offer society? What is the discipline you put yourself through so that you may offer something through your work to society. And there's a lot of different ways you can show up in the public role. It's often profession, but that's not the only way. But so that's the first piece is Saturn and Neptune have really brought this, this query into your 10th house, like what's real about the work you're doing in the world, what isn't, what's too idealistic. You might need to let go of some things and focus on some others. That's really what the two things bring. Now, at the beginning of March, there's a lot of focus. The first half of March really is a lot of energy in the Pisces place. So for you with Cancer rising, that means a lot of time being spent kind of feeling nourished by wisdom, nourished by teachers, perhaps some travels that you are going on that really kind of help you be in that place of empathy and compassion and like being aware of like everybody is one big field of consciousness. So there's been a lot of time in these past few weeks to really kind of work in that space and really fill up your cup in terms of your worldview. What are these experiences that are informing your spirituality? And so once you kind of have that period, well, the first thing that's going to happen is that our little red warrior goddess here, who is Venus going into Aries, she's going to leave behind that state of exaltation in Pisces where she's really been able to soften and kind of figure out her values in that regard and then move into Aries. And at that point, once she contacts Neptune and the Saturn, which is happening February 6th through February 8th, I'm sorry, March, March 6th through March 8th. Once she does that, she's going to first contact Neptune and then Saturn, really kind of bringing into question what are your deeply held values that are part of your belief system? What kind of structures are you building on those values? And because we're looking at the 10th house, I'm going to say that this might have something to do with money and your financial, the finances that are associated with whatever work that you do. It's not the only place we look for that, but it is once with Venus here. So that's going to be one set of things you really want to think about. And then the sun is also going to do the same thing. The sun is going to move into Aries on March 20th. And it's going to have contacted Neptune and then Saturn by the 25th. So the sun really just kind of follows suit and just sort of illuminates what's happening, really shines a bright light on, again, that idea of what's real, what are your ideals, what are your belief patterns, and then what can you actually manifest? What can you actually have the capacity for to make in concrete terms? So that's kind of what, generally speaking, the process is during the month of March. So, Laurie, what do you want to add to this
Well, I
picture
was
that?
just, there's so many ways to look at this stuff, but with, this month is mostly really focused on just illuminating that Saturn Neptune conjunction and the fact that we are in the beginning processes of that. So just thinking about the fact that these planets are going to be in that area of your chart for a long time. If you've got Cancer rising, you're learning a lot about, yeah, who you are as a leader in some sort of public sense and how your leadership has to be based on your beliefs, your spiritual beliefs, your underlying, yeah, your underlying spiritual understandings, your compassion, all of those things about Neptune have to be upholding the work that you need to be doing over the next few years in a public realm. So that's really what this month is shining a light on. At the same time, one thing that we haven't really been talking about much is the fact that Mercury is retrograde through a good part of this month. And that, I believe, if I'm thinking correctly, that happens in Pisces. Is that right?
Yep.
That retrograde? Yeah. So it's in your ninth house. So, while this process is getting underway and really pushing you into the work that you have to do in a public manner, you're really engaged in a process of more deeply understanding how your mind is navigating those issues of wisdom, those issues of your higher understanding of the world. But bottom line, your focus is on who the birth of yourself as a spiritual warrior in public.
Yeah.
This is a huge birth moment from Pisces to Aries. This is just, it's not a minor thing. It is coming from, it's the birth moment.
Yes, and also I think for Cancer rising people, like the transition from the ninth to the 10th house, to have that represent a birth process. It's like what is your critical thinking, your philosophy of life, all the experiences in your life that have created what is ultimately your worldview, and sort of from that, giving birth from that kind of ethos to what it is that you're going to manifest for work, like your professional life, or your public life. Like, how are you going to stand up? And the 10th house is just the most, is the brightest, most public house. So it really is, there's some onus that's being put upon you, the social responsibility, that you need to grapple with and decide how you want to work with, and which parts you want to accept and which parts you need to let go of, and all of those questions. And you don't necessarily, some of it's your choice, like through Venus, but some of it's also surrendering to what you're being called to do, what you're being asked to do, by the collective, by the culture. So I think it's really interesting to think about that as a birth moment.
It's a big responsibility you're taking on.
Yeah. Yes. So, sounds
Yes.
good. All right. Well, I gotta go. So,
Right, you've got a responsibility to take care of here.
well, shall we move on? Are you ready for
Sure.
next Leo rising?
Sure, let's move on. Okay, so we are talking about the month of March, and the first thing really to think about is that this month is really focusing our attention on what happened last month. Really is how I think about it. Is I think it was the 20th of February when Saturn and Neptune finally conjuncted at 0 degrees of Aries, and that process is in your ninth house. There's a lot that's going to change in a really big way over the coming years when it comes to your worldview, your understanding, all the experiences of your life that have brought you to the bigger view of the world. This could be around religion or politics or any number of things, other cultural understandings. So there's that has is going on. This month, we start with a lot of attention still in Pisces, with the Sun and Venus moving through that area, and Mercury is doing its retrograde in there as well. So you do start this month with a lot of attention on how your understanding of how to navigate the deepest levels of your relationships. So you're working on that. You're kind of surrendering to your own understanding of how to work with other people, and you're working on that. But then, what is it? On the 6th, the 6th is when this warrior goddess here, this little red warrior goddess, which is Venus, steps into Aries and immediately bumps into Neptune, then Saturn. So our goddess warrior is going from her process of understanding other people into, okay, I've got to take action now on my beliefs and my responsibilities to my beliefs. This could be a real birth of a new understanding of politics, religion, other cultures. This is a real awakening of wisdom,
Mm. Hmm.
of what the world is really about. And then so Venus does that process, and then later in the month on the 20th, the sun follows suit and does the same thing. So then we've got all of this attention on what are your beliefs? over the next few years, those of you with Leo rising are going to be working really hard to bring your spiritual understanding into your into being a leader with your beliefs.
Mm.
This could be a time of teaching, of bringing, yeah, your warrior goddess is waking up. This process between Pisces and Aries is really a birth process because Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. And when anything moves in there, it's like it's been through this long process and now it's like rebirth. It's like wake up. This is a huge new process starting. Your beliefs, your understanding of the bigger world are going to be dramatically changed and how you respond to them.
Yeah. I was thinking with this one too, like just the idea of just having these individual experiences where you have Pisces, these individual experiences of like how you've managed to set the right boundaries or you haven't, like how you've done that dance of navigating other people's stuff because you have such a sensitivity here with Pisces there that you have a really profound ability to be empathetic with Pisces in the eighth house. Like you can really kind of understand people on a deeper level than a lot of people, which is funny with a Leo rising chart. You might not think that, but that's the case. And so now what you're doing is you're taking all of those individual experiences that you've had in your life, but while Saturn particularly has been in Pisces, and you're letting your worldview be based on those personal experiences where you've had these encounters. I mean, maybe with people from all walks of life that have really blown your mind open, and really kind of expanded your wisdom in a very personal way that makes you
Mm.
kind of uniquely situated to kind of fight this fight and say, look, there's more than one point of view here, folks. There's so many different life experiences in this world of people from all over, all different countries, all different places. And it's time to like pay attention to the diversity of that experience and stop trying to kind of limit one over another. So I think that Leo, and that makes sense too, because Leo rising, you got that charisma. People, whether you want it or not, people project that Leo flair, that drama, that ability to be the royalty. People project that onto you. So you have a great opportunity here to really kind of reckon with what's your belief system. How does that work with your shiny Leo-ness? And you also have this ability to bring this deeply empathetic grappling that you've been forced to do, and what you've learned from that. So I like this. I think this one is I mean, obviously you get to decide how you wield this. You got to look at your own structures of belief and what, how you want to actually put this into some kind of action. But I think that's pretty exciting. So
Yeah, it could
yeah.
bring, this could really blast open um, the ability to be a spiritual teacher
Yeah. Hmm.
of some sort, taking the responsibility for teaching what you know to be true. I
Yeah.
love
Or
this
yeah.
one. I love this
Yeah.
one.
And just in your own struggles, like the struggle, the Saturn going through the eighth house, the struggle to set the right healthy boundaries, and the recognition that sometimes failing is the best teacher because you remember and you have something to transform from that. So something about that.
I have
Yeah.
a sister with this one, and this is
Mhm.
just so beautifully represented in what I see happening with her. And I could go into a big teaching moment with it, but I'll resist that. But it's just like there's such a powerful ability. People with Leo rising do. I mean, the whole thing that you talk about around Leo with, the hearth fire. People
Yeah.
with Leo rising are just so dynamic.
Mm.
And having this awakening to their own spiritual understanding or whatever, and being willing to do the work and be the leader, this could, yeah. You
Yeah.
know, obviously it could be used in negative ways or positive ways. But if you're listening to this, just understanding that over these next couple of years, you're really learning what kind of a teacher you can be, what kind of gifts you have to bring your worldview. And it's, yeah, there's a lot of responsibility in this.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course it depends on your other astrology makeup, but
Right.
but shall we digress? let,
Yes, shall
let,
we digress? Let's go
let's
on.
move on to Virgo rising. Okay, so those of you with Virgo rising, I'm just going to kind of go over what some of the things might be happening for you during March, based on this cluster of symbols we have over here on the right side of your chart. So let's just start from the beginning, which is the idea that Neptune and Saturn are already in Aries. They conjuncted on February 20th, and they're pressing into your eighth house. And I imagine this might not be the most comfortable because the eighth house is really that place where we have to deal with other people's deeply held values and convictions and attitudes about money and all of these things that often end up being a source of conflict with other people. Let's be honest. This is a lot of the eighth house does have a lot to do with where we bump into that, and there's these difficulties and conflicts. And because of that, the eighth house has a lot to do with knowing yourself well enough so that you know where to kind of set boundaries around how you're going to deal with other people. So there's a lot of that. Those planets have already pushed there. So you're already kind of grappling with like, what's real here? What old belief patterns do I have that have to do with other people's stuff? And and kind of like what lessons am I going to have to learn here with Saturn going in here? There's this kind of grappling that's already happening. And if there's any kind of idealism, there's a little bit of the spell breaking here where it's like, okay, Saturn's crashing into Neptune as a reality check. So that's kind of what's already going on as we come into March. Now there's a significant part of March where there's still a ton of focus on Pisces, and actually for most of the month there's still quite some focus on Pisces. So Pisces here is really, I'm seeing this as a place of, there's a softness with Pisces. It's about endings, it's about softening into things. And there also can be a lot of idealism around relationships with Pisces here in your seventh house. So I think there's something in that of kind of being in that floaty Pisces space in these past few weeks. And hopefully some of that has been healing, maybe bringing in some layers of forgiveness and acceptance, which is what Pisces does. So there's some of that. But even as we get started with March, we have this red warrior goddess lady here who represents Venus going into Aries. So Venus is exalted in Pisces, is really being kind of like relishing in that. And now she's getting on her horse and she's galloping off into Aries and taking on this different persona, suiting up for battle, maybe. And so she goes into Aries, and no sooner does she do that, but she encounters Neptune and then Saturn. Bam, bam. Right, March 6th through the 8th. It's just right there. So right away, she's having to contend with, whoa, what are my belief systems around other people's baggage? And oh my God, like where have I been really harsh and set too harsher boundaries? Or where am I being, where are some lessons that I might need to learn about that? So that's what Venus is doing when she contacts Neptune and Saturn, really calling into question your values around dealing with other people. And this is all happening kind of behind the scenes. It's in the dark half of the moon. It's a real internal process that's going on here. And then a little bit later in the month, the sun follows suit. Now, this is this is a different part of the moon cycle. We've already had a new moon at this point, and the sun goes into Aries on the 20th at the March equinox. So this is really dynamically shifting more of the attention, more of your consciousness into that eighth house Aries space at this point. Things are becoming a much more kind of on the surface and like, whoa, this is really in my face now, and I'm having to deal with this.
Mhm.
And then it does the same thing. It contacts Neptune, it contacts Saturn. So all of that to say there's this light being shown on these really on relationship between the seventh and the eighth house, the sort of more surface layer of relationship, and then what's behind the scenes, what's the deeper layer. And you're really being forced as a Virgo rising person to kind of confront that deeper layer of other people's stuff, and if you're getting a little pissed off, like That's okay, because that's just giving you information. These are not easier parts of your life. So there's a real this is a real time to kind of consider all that. And I'm just gonna pass it over to you, Lori, because I've said a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting because I also want to consider the fact that Mercury's been retrograde for uh, most of this month as well. It goes direct on the 20th, same day the moon moves into Aries. So that retrograde has been in your seventh house. There's a lot of thought process through this month about rethinking your connection to relationships and, maybe conversations that have to be done over,
Mm,
thought processes that have to be done over. And then as the sun and Venus first goes in there, and then the sun the same day the retrograde is over, the sun goes in and then conjuncts with Neptune, then Saturn. We've got, this is really a call to action. This is a call to taking action on um, what's necessary for you to understand how to navigate other people's stuff. I think people with Virgo rising, with Aries in that eighth house, I think that's a weird place to have Aries. But it's like you're having to navigate other people's issues, but you do it in a really selfish way. You have to do it really directly. So this is a real time of learning. Saturn will be in there for about 2.5 years or so. This is the beginning of really getting clear on what it is you're going to be learning for the next few years around how you show up
mm.
and navigate. Navigating people's deep issues is pretty darn important. Yes, the eighth house is about setting boundaries, but you don't want to do them in a Aries manner of I'm going to knock you over the head if I don't get things the way I want them. So Neptune is bringing your spiritual understanding, your compassion. It's bringing a softer tone in there for Saturn to work with, I think.
Yeah.
So there's a way that you're facing reality that although you have to work really hard right now on figuring out how to set boundaries and all this stuff, you also have to, that work has to be based on your spiritual understandings.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're
And then,
waking up to, you really have to encounter your spiritual goddess and the work that it has to do.
yeah. And, yeah, I was just going to comment too. Like, we've been talking about this idea of a birth moment because of Neptune, Saturn being at zero Aries and then being contact because there's a rebirth that's really happening here. And it's so interesting to think about for those of you of Virgo rising, that rebirth process or the birthing a new self, maybe is a better way to put it, is happening right in the thick of your relationships. Because I mean, the seventh and the eighth house, I mean, they have everything to do with partnerships, and this is all different kinds. This is also business partnerships. There's stuff about contracts in here. This is marriage and marriage contracts. I mean, this is not just your kind of, these are the publicly visible relationships you're talking about. And you having to kind of give yourself a new beginning in terms of how you're going to manage those deeper layers, and so there's something about, I think something could be helpful here is the idea of new rituals in
Mhm.
your eighth house,
Yeah.
helping to exactly like soften those edges, because I mean Aries is so like I'm out of here, right? And sometimes that's necessary for sure, no question about it, but sometimes that's overkill. So it's like it's that dance, and having Saturn and Neptune there, it is really calling into the question like where can you be softer? Where do you need to stick to your guns and say, I'm not rolling over? There's both of those happening, and that's part of you being a new you in a way. Yeah.
That's pretty
Probably.
interesting. So yeah, it's a new birth. Okay. So are we
Okay.
ready?
Yeah. Libra.
Okay.
Okay. Libra rising.
All
Here
right.
we go.
So, for those of you with Libra rising, as you can see with the little symbols, everything's crowded over there in the sixth and seventh houses, and that's where our focus is for this month. If you've got Libra rising, that's where your focus is this month. So, on February 20th, last month, we had the conjunction that was talked about so much. I'm sure you heard a lot about it if you're following astrology, the conjunction between Neptune and Saturn. So that really becomes a pretty big focus of this month as well. We start out with a lot of activity going on in Pisces as the sun is moving through there. Mercury is retrograde in Pisces. Venus is going through there as well. So there starts out a lot of focus on what's going on in your day-to-day routines. How are you taking care of yourself? How's your health? All of those things around, yeah, how you manage your lifestyle. Let's think of it that way. So that's where a lot of attention starts. But then on the 6th, I believe it's on March 6th, that Venus, after being in Pisces and being so comfortable and happy in Pisces, she takes off her beautiful Pisces gowns and becomes this bright red little warrior goddess that you see hanging out with the sun. But she steps in first and she immediately comes into contact with Neptune and then Saturn. So this really puts our attention on your seventh house. This is a huge process. Later in the month, the sun follows suit. On the 20th, the sun goes into Aries, which is the equinox, and the sun then also conjuncts Neptune and then Saturn. So what's happening is our attention is being brought from these ideas of kind of keeping things comfortable in the day-to-day routines and then, oh, what do I need to be really looking at in terms of my personal closest relationships? This is a point in time when you're going to see a lot of changes around your relationship. I mean, this is bringing, these planets are just going over into the top part of the chart. This is from Pisces to Aries. This is a rebirth. Over the next few years, you are going to be really grappling with your own understanding of what relationship means to you, what your relationship, what you encounter in your relationship, what you're learning from being in relationship. There's a lot that's going to be happening in that area. So, thinking about it as a rebirth, you're looking for your own need to take action on what your beliefs are. What are your beliefs? What is your spiritual connection with your partner? There could be a lot of learning about that or the lack of it, what that means to you. What do you have to say here, Jennie? I feel like
Well,
I'm just rattling on.
it's easy to feel like, oh, there's so much going on in this part of the chart. Well, I
Yeah.
was thinking about being a Libra rising person. So Libra is so focused on relationship anyway. So here we are. And I think that, Saturn and
Oh,
Neptune in your seventh house is really kind of stirring up, like, what are your belief patterns around partnership? And, and we all inherit these things from the culture, from our upbringing, our families, from the role models that we, the parents, which we either want to be like or want to be nothing like or whatever. But just like having this whole system of beliefs, and I think having Saturn, Neptune, bam, conjunct in your seventh house. Like, this is breaking the spell. I really like that kind of key phrase, breaking the spell of, whatever illusions you may have had about relationship and how they, how that impacted you. So I think that this is an important moment. And this is another one of those for me, when you think about this as being a birth moment from everything beneath the horizon, now we're going into the public view. That is such an important, especially for a Libra rising person, a birth moment of, wait a minute, who am I in relationship? What do I bring to the partnership? Where does the concept of I fit into we? There's something really powerful about this because with Libra rising, you've kind of been led around by relationships anyway. So this is a really good moment to establish some independence, to establish some autonomy, to yet not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It doesn't mean you can't have a relationship. It just means that you get to decide, you get to have a bit more agency over, well, where do I want to be a we and must I just continue being an I and allow that? So that's the dance here. And
Yeah.
hopefully you've had some time in March to really step back and soften into those routines. And, hopefully you've gotten a lot of sleep. You've been able to kind of pull
Mm.
back. I think that would be the meaning of planets being in Pisces. And as you said, Mercury in retrograde. I'm sorry, Mercury retrograde in Pisces too. There's still, there's that need for that continued self-care, which is going to enable you to understand who's the new you in relationship,
You
you know?
know, I think a lot of that work in the sixth house could really reflect, yeah, it's like really looking at how your day-to-day routines sustain you.
Yeah.
And then, okay, what you need to be sustained. And then with all this focus shifting into the seventh house, does your relationship sustain you the way you need to be sustained?
Yeah.
That could be a question that you're looking at. With Libra rising, like you said, yeah, if
Mhm.
anyone with Libra rising walks around the world trying to please everybody. And this
Yeah.
is a real moment of, yeah, am I being sustained in this relationship? Am I
Yeah.
showing up? Or am I so busy pleasing others? Yeah, this
Mhm.
is really, it's a really, really important time to be clear about your spiritual understanding and beliefs on what relationship means and doing the work to bring that into reality.
Yeah. And also the flip side of that, the other face of Libra to me is the contrary face, the devil's advocate. They're like, oh, you want me to do that because we're in a relationship? F off. Like I'm not doing that. 'Cause, like Libra can do that too. And so it might mean, and certainly with Aries in the seventh house, right? So it might also mean part of it with Neptune there is softening on that. And where is it okay to blend and blur more with another person? Where is that okay? Where do you need to be unified? So it's not one or the other, it's both, right? And depending on your personality, those of you who are listening, you may resonate with one end of that or another, or something in the middle.
Being
Especially Libra.
a warrior, becoming a warrior for spiritual relationship.
Yeah. And not letting go of those routines, right? Like sustaining yourself, your own mystical needs, your spiritual needs, sort of saying it's not the other person's responsibility to keep those for you. It's yours.
Right.
Your responsibility to maintain, one foot or one hand or whatever part of yourself in that magical Pisces space. And that might mean that it could mean a whole bunch of different things. I mean, I was just going to say it could mean that you have a totally different people that you hang out with and do your fun, your kind of pursuits with your lifestyle things, other than your partner or not,
I,
whatever.
I think you have to really look at, what is your vision for a relationship and what is the work and effort you have to do to support that.
Yeah, that's great, Laurie. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there's a real ability to give the self away here with Libra, one way or another, give the self away. So yeah, I think that's a very important. I think you hit the nail
Yeah.
on the head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your vision and what's the work for the next 2.5 years, Saturn's going to be going through that house and you're going to be confronted with a lot of a lot of work to support your relationship in one way or another.
Yeah. Okay. I think we kind of hit that one. So
Okay.
let's move on to Scorpio rising. Okay, so those of you with Scorpio rising, let's just start from, well, I guess the beginning in this case of these horoscopes, which is the fact that we have Neptune and Saturn already in Aries. They conjuncted on February 20th, so they've already pushed into your sixth house, which is, I know Laurie likes to talk about, you like to talk about this as the lifestyle. I think that makes so much sense. If you think about everything that makes up your lifestyle, how you eat, how you sleep, whether or not you have any sort of meditation practice. A big one for Aries in the sixth house is exercise.
Mhm.
How are you burning off heat? Is that something that you're doing or not? So I think that's what is really already firmly in your consciousness with Neptune and Saturn moving here. And there's some kind of grappling with, what's real and what isn't. Which of my routines are actually working to do to as preventative medicine, basically. The sixth house is where we need to alleviate stress. And so I think there's some question around where am I being really not very clear about what's actually supporting me. This might be a time where you have to confront some addictive tendencies with
Mhm.
Neptune there, that there might be something that you're fooling yourself that you've said is helping you, but isn't really, like having a cigarette is relieving my stress. Is it? So that kind of those are the kinds of topics that might come up. And with Saturn there, you're going to be taking a good hard look and really thinking about your health, because the sixth house does play a role in health. So that's kind of the first piece. Then we also need to simply think about the fact that for much of March, there's still a big Pisces emphasis. You've still got several planets in Pisces, certainly as we begin. Mars is there. Mercury retrograde is in Pisces, really kind of pulling you around. So there is something about spending a good part of March really sinking into those wonderful places of creative pursuits. Maybe this is you have these little children you play with that just bring you that joy. That's another way to think about the fifth house. But really just allowing yourself to be in that pleasure space that Pisces in the fifth house is bringing. I mean, this is a time as we come into March, really nourishing yourself in preparation for this huge call to action. So hopefully you've been feeling some of that. And Venus is still there at the very beginning of the month, but then she goes into Aries. She's this red warrior goddess lady, because once she moves into Aries, she's fierce. She's not messing around anymore. So she goes into Aries and starts lighting up these planets. First, she, bangs into Neptune, and then Saturn. So she's really kind of getting you to look at, wait, what are your values here? What are the values that are underlying the choices you make about your routines? That's what she brings to the mix, is this really personal, what are these things that I think are super important that I need to start acting on? So that's what she brings in. And she's this goddess and warrior goddess. So she's really activating it.
Mhm.
And then a little bit later on, the sun does exactly the same thing. On the March equinox, we have the sun on March 20th, that is, going into Aries, and then contacting Neptune and then hitting Saturn. So that is, just the second iteration of like, all right, bringing the light of consciousness to these things, now becoming more conscious about this transition zone between these things that you love to do and then what needs to be part of your routine. And thinking about how those houses work together.
Mhm.
So, yeah, Laurie, how do you want to carry on my blather?
Well, I'll blather a little too.
Yeah.
Y- it's just interesting to think that because these planets just moved in there, this is yeah, Neptune and Saturn, because they just moved in there and they've just made their conjunction. They are starting a process together of stabilizing a vision. So, what is it? First, you want to think about what is your vision around your lifestyle choices, around your health, and how are you ready to take this area very seriously and take action on it. And then with Venus and the sun coming in here, this is the first time since they've come together that they've been touched off by other planets with a
Mhm.
conjunction, which again, conjunctions are the beginning of a cycle. So this is really starting a process of yeah, highlighting this. What is your vision? And what are you willing and capable of sustaining about it? You
Mm.
want to be careful. You don't want to say, well, I'm going to play volleyball every day for the next 10 years because my that would be good for my health. I don't know why that came up in my mind, but
Like,
at, at any rate, um, are you going, whatever it is that your vision is about how you take care of your body, you want to be really clear. Can I sustain that long term? You
oh,
know,
that's a really good question. Yeah,
over the next few years, you're going to be really looking at how your body sustains your lifestyle.
yeah.
And you want to get clear what your vision is and what is imagination and what's sustainable.
Mm.
I think that's a lot of what this is really pushing you to think about and consider.
Yes, and when you kind of layer in the whole, new beginnings, or sort of a birth process that Saturn and Neptune are bringing in, you really you're coming from this space. The fifth house really ultimately is about how you give love. So if you think about this flow of love emanating from you, and with Pisces there, you have a lot of capacity to do that, and it flows beautifully with your Scorpio rising too. Like there's this watery flow of your creative processes, and then kind of from that it's just in a sense like just making sure that you're doing the things Laurie's saying, that you're making sure you're thinking about long-term sustaining. Like you can't sustain that 100% flow of love all the time. You would just, the cup just dumps over and spills. And, so there's something about having to sustain, like what is sustainable for you, and kind of moving this little birth process of moving from the fifth to the sixth house. Like, the fifth house, you get to keep doing those things where you're just giving of yourself. But then the sixth house is saying, yeah, but what's your capacity? And with Saturn there, it's like, ooh, okay, well, yes, you need to burn off heat because you've got Aries there, but you also need some soothing practices. You also need to make sure that you're really considering your health. But I always think that with Aries in the sixth house, it's got to be some kind of way that you let yourself get hot,
Mm.
whether that's sitting in a hot tub or whether that's climbing a huge mountain. I mean, you get to decide what the thing is, but there has to be something about heat and letting the heat come out and be removed, because it's things like inflammation that can be problems with health. So
Mm. Mm.
some way that heat has to come out. um, anyway, it's been a little soapbox about that one.
No, that's good. That's good. I think that's really important. Yeah, it's really a time to wake up to what your vision is there and how you can take action on it. And yeah, the heat and the action, yeah, your day-to-day routines have to have that heat, that
Yeah,
physicality involved in it.
yeah.
So you can play volleyball or go mountain biking or whatever.
Yeah. So this is really, I think this one's really a lot about taking care of your health,
Yeah.
and really understanding that. So I think we've driven that point home enough. You
All
think?
right, let's move on then.
Okay, let's move on to Sagittarius rising.
Okay. So for those of you with Sagittarius rising, let's take a look at this. Let's see. Okay, so we're talking about March, but in order to talk about March, we have to go backwards a little bit and think about what happened on February 20th when Saturn and Neptune conjuncted at 0 degrees of Aries. And the reason we have to bring that in is because that is what this month of March is really highlighting. We start out the month with a little more ease. Things start out with planets going through your fourth house, through Pisces. Those of you with Sagittarius rising, you've got this big personality, and yet when it comes to your home and family, you have such a kind of an idealistic sweet spot. I think of the home and family as an idealistic sweet spot for people with Sagittarius rising.
Hmm.
And that's where the month really begins with you kind of embraced in that. So you may be feeling a lot of compassion toward your family. You may be feeling like you really want to spend a lot of time at home in this kind of sweet space. Mercury is also doing a retrograde there through most of this month. And so there's conversations, maybe family conversations that have to be renegotiated. So all of that is going on. But then we have what happens is on the 6th, I believe, I keep forgetting these dates. I think it's the 6th through the 8th, where Venus, which is represented by this little warrior goddess here, she moves into Aries. She immediately conjuncts with Neptune and then with Saturn. So she's bringing her, she's very happy. She's been in Pisces. She loves being in Pisces. So she's got all this sweetness about her. But then she puts on her warrior costume when she goes into Aries, and she has to look at she has to look at Neptune. So let's think of Neptune as vision and Saturn as responsibility and hard work. And when she steps in there, she's stepping into the area of her life, of your life rather, that is about how you give of yourself. The fifth
Mm.
house is how you give love. It's creativity, it's children, this is a new birth that is happening in your creativity. And Venus goes in there and she brings her values to where you're waking up to this responsibility of how you give love. Later in the month, on the 20th, when we come to the equinox, the sun moves into Aries and does the same pattern. It goes into Aries, it conjuncts Neptune, it conjuncts Saturn. We've got, this is a process of beginnings. This is all about beginnings. The whole process from Pisces to Aries is a birth. It's coming from the last sign of the zodiac to the first sign of the zodiac. It's really a process of birth. Anyone with Sagittarius rising has a lot of energy and heat and passion to give love in the world. And this is really pointing to the developing your understanding of what your vision is around how you give love and how you can create it in the real world, in a real world way, how you can sustain love, how you can sustain the giving of love.
Yeah. When I see this one, I sort of have this image of somebody being all kind of sleepy eyed and rumpled, like being all cozy on the couch with a blanket with, Pisces in the fourth house, and then being like, oh man, I'm gonna play this role in this theater production, and now I have to not be home like much at all and just be full bore, practicing for this theatrical production. It would be an example of the fifth house. And there's something about having to break out of that private, soft little nest. And I think you've already said this, but just that the stark difference between that and then, oop, I've got to be out in the world doing this thing. And even though the fifth house, I mean, the fifth house is an extension of you. It's your creative self-expression. So it's sort of like a next level step of who you are as a self, where you're really just like putting yourself out there. And I mean, part of our heritage as human beings is to create something. And the fifth house really brings in that creative act. And so this is a time when you're being called, into that creative action. And it really is that labor of love that you pour your love into, that you're just be willing to do no matter what, the thing you feel called to do. Which actually a lot of people I know who do theater, that is what they feel. It's just this, I gotta act.
Yeah.
So there's a lot about that, and
And
I
it
think
could
that,
be, that fifth house, it could be something about a child.
of course, yeah,
This could very well be a rebirth of you as giving your love to a child.
yeah,
Or, I think of someone that I'm specifically thinking of here who, yeah, definitely, definitely, all that warm fuzzy at home. And then there's this raging artist coming out.
yes.
And I can see this so clearly. There can
Mhm.
also be that there's been this one way of giving love, and now that has to change.
Yeah.
There's a new, it's like really it's placing your spiritual understanding under your need to take action um, for giving love.
Yeah.
There's a responsibility over the next couple of years. You're going to learn how to give love. You're going to learn how to create something from your vision.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting the fourth and fifth because it's, family and in this context is children, but I think it's really the fun part of children. It's the
Oh
playful
yeah.
part of children. It's the games and suddenly you're like, talking about a Santa Claus again when you've had a child, possibly. So it really kind of brings in this more, I don't know, like hobbies and games and kind of, yeah, fantasy games and things like that, I think are part of it. So it is an interesting this is an interesting sign line because the fourth house to me is an angular house, so there's more responsibility here. There's a responsibility to offer support from the fourth house to yourself in your personality, but to your family members, and home becomes this anchor. And so there's something about that, and then having to move out into this more playful space and kind of going beyond that comfy little nest. So
I always love thinking about Saturn moving through someone's fifth house or people who have Saturn in the fifth house. It's like play has to be work. It's like you have to work on your play. You have to work on how you give love. Over the next couple of years, you're going to be working hard on you, play becomes there's a responsibility in play.
yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, you're going to be kind of addressing like what you can't manage, what's too idealistic and too out of the box of Neptune, and then what you can actually manifest, what you're actually going to do, how you're actually going to be able to put your love, your creative works into the world,
Could
whichever
be
is your goal.
an amazing piece for artists.
Yeah, I know exactly.
Just
I have someone
amazing.
like, I know someone with this too, and I'm just
Just
definitely thinking about
yeah,
this.
yeah. Me too. Yeah,
So,
that's really lovely. I love that one. That's great. Huh.
okay, so I think we've kind of
Cool.
covered that one, hopefully.
Yep.
And let's move on to Capricorn rising. Okay, if you have Capricorn rising, let's have a little overview of what we're looking at in the month of March for your horoscope. Before I get to that, let's just talk about I have Neptune, the blue planet, and the ring planet Saturn here. They are already in Aries. They conjuncted it at 0 Aries on February 20th. So there's already been a big focus put on your fourth house, which is the house of home. Home has a lot of levels. There's the internal home of your heart, there's the physical home of your house. There's the home of your lineage that you're born into. And there's a very private component to the fourth house. It's the most private house in the whole chart. So it's interesting to have these two planets, Neptune and Saturn, moving in there and kind of pressing on, what's real and what isn't. What belief patterns do you have that are completely linked to your family of origin, for example? What belief patterns do you have that you really need to address and look at that are not actually serving you? Having Saturn there too kind of brings that in. Wait a minute, what's real, what is, because the fourth house is also foundation, so what's concrete, where do my feet feel firmly planted on the ground? I think that is an important question to think of. So that's kind of what's already being pushing on you. And then as we come into March, there's still a lot of soft Pisces focus on your third house. This is a really important time in March to go gently in the world, really reflect on how you're communicating with other people. Bringing sort of tenderness and empathy into your communications are all going to be focuses. Maybe it's time to Maybe it's been a time of more silence for you, where you've just needed to kind of give it a rest and not be speaking as much. So those are all things that are happening during the month of March. We've got a bunch of planets in Pisces. We've got Mercury retrograde in Pisces. So that's kind of the first part of it. But then Venus, who's represented by this red warrior goddess lady, she goes into Aries. She's been in Pisces, really enjoying herself, calming down, and now she's ready to suit up and get on that horse and gallop off into Aries, and start getting kind of fierce about what's happening in your foundation and in your home life. So she does that. She makes contact with Neptune and then Saturn. So that really brings in this idea of like, what are your values here? What are your most deeply held values that have to do with your family life and your foundation? I mean, that's what really she adds to the mix. She kind of really stirs the pot here and is like, what is the under the hood here for you? Like, what do you really believe that has come from your family
Mhm.
patterns? So that's kind of the first piece. That's happening from March 6th to March 8th. And then we got a little bit of time to digest in there. And then the sun does the same thing. The sun goes into Aries on March 20th. And then it contacts Neptune and then Saturn, and wrapping that up by the 25th. So in that period of time, you will be able to have much more kind of illumination about this process. The sun really shines a light on everything and kind of makes it more obvious, which could be extremely helpful, and you kind of understanding what needs to happen here. So that's kind of in a nutshell what's happening during the month of March. And there's this real need for you to get clear about what is your vision for what's happening in where you're living right now, and then what's realistic. What can you actually pull off? So yeah.
I think that's really important. What's your vision in terms of home or family, and what is actually sustainable and realistic? And it'll take a while for that to unfold, but this is a real call to action to really get clear about what home means to you and what you're willing to do to create it,
Mm,
right?
hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a long process that we're going through here with this conjunction of those two big outer planets. For the next couple of years, there's going to be a lot of focus on, yeah, facing the reality. What is your home? Is it what you need it to be? Does it match your spiritual beliefs that come from your home or family lineage? And if those are what you want to continue with. This is a very, very important point. This rebirth process from the third house to the fourth house. And if you think about, when you were talking about what's going on in the third house at the beginning of the month when we're still kind of in that space more, and we've got Mercury is going retrograde there. I just want to add that that third house is also about siblings,
Mhm.
and that connection between siblings and home and family is always pretty interesting to me. And when that difference goes from Pisces to Aries, it changes it a lot. It's like wherever Pisces is, I think we're incredibly idealistic. So, the relationships with the siblings may have a lot of idealism wrapped into those relationships. And that's where you learned how to communicate, and you kind of tend to, hold that kind of compassionate, soft
Mm,
place.
yeah.
But then when it comes to the home and family, there's a lot more heat. The actual, maybe the parents, the ancestral line. What's the rub there between the relationships with siblings and the deeper place of the ancestral line and the actual home?
Mm,
And what's your vision of bringing that together? And what is the work that you've got to do over the next couple of years to take responsibility and create the vision in a positive way?
mm. Well, that's really good, Lori, because I was just thinking, I was like, okay, you're doing a birth process from the third to the fourth. And, there is a division line there. There's the lowest point of the chart is usually somewhere in the fourth house, not always, but usually somewhere down there. And kind of like, yeah, yeah, I guess it's like sort of the third house is like the family stew, you and the siblings, you're all together in kind of a big mushy group of Pisces. But then all of a sudden it's like you're trying to establish yourself as an independent self in the home life. And so depending what age you are, that looks different when you're 15 than when you're 50. Though you might shock yourself at age 50 at how childish you can still be. But really, I mean, I guess this is old work that never necessarily completely goes away. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Like that's a real, does it need to define the self, here that's different. And that I think that represents that birth process and some of the labor pains of like, how might that impact the sibling relationships? Or maybe you're calling your siblings to step up and be more responsible. Let's say you're taking care of aging parents.
Mhm.
It might be that you're kind of like, come on, I need your help. I need support here. Can you please step into this role with me? I mean, there could be some I don't know, whoever you are with Capricorn rising, think about that distinction, or maybe you're an only child and being burdened with parents or something. I don't know.
There's some way in which you are really facing the reality of changes that have to happen in your home.
Yeah,
Whether that's, yeah, I mean, that can
yeah,
play out a lot of different ways. But what
yeah.
is your responsibility around creating your home and not allowing yourself to be in a state of delusion about it, but really
Hmm.
allowing yourself to bring in vision
Yeah.
instead of delusion, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. What Okay, so for those of you with Aquarius rising, we're talking about the month of March 2026. And in order to talk about March, we really have to look back a little bit and bring up the fact that on February 20th, Saturn and Neptune conjuncted at 0 degrees Aries. The reason that's important is that this month, March, really a big part of what is happening. The most pressing issue is the fact that that conjunction is highlighted really strongly. We start the month with a lot of focus in your second house in Pisces. That's where the sun is. Mercury is retrograde there. Venus is traveling through Pisces. So there's a lot of attention at the beginning of the month on how you feel about yourself, how you feel about money, resources, your own self-worth. That process is probably, you tend to be kind of idealistic there. So you're kind of traveling in this little idealistic bubble in a way at the start of March. Then on March 6th, what really happens is Venus, which is represented by this red warrior goddess, she steps into Aries, where she becomes this warrior goddess instead of just laying around on pillows like she has been doing in Pisces. Now, as the warrior goddess, she immediately bumps into Neptune and then Saturn. This happens in your third house. This is where your third house is where a really huge rebirth is happening. And Venus brings values to that rebirth and brings your attention to that rebirth. Later in the month, on the 20th, the sun follows the same path. It goes into Aries on the equinox. The same day, Mercury goes direct as well. And the sun goes into Aries, conjuncts with Neptune, and then conjuncts with Saturn. So this really brings our attention and our focus on this rebirth. What's the rebirth? For you, it's about how you use your voice, how you speak up for yourself, how you speak, how you engage in the day-to-day kind of conversations with the people in your immediate environment. So this is, you going to the whatever, to the local co-op and who you speak to and who you don't speak to. Take your earplugs out and speak to people. That's the first thing that I somehow think of. But this conjunction is a process, a very long process. We want to think about, there's a birth happening here, and it is the birth of looking at what your vision is of how you use your voice, how you connect with people in this space of your immediate environment, and what What's required of you? What's required of you is that you bring your spiritual understanding to what you speak up about. What's required of you is that you determine, discern what what your capacity is.
Mm,
So this is really the focus of the month, right? Like, what
mm.
is it? What is it that you need to be ready to bring that warrior goddess to? What is the rebirth of your voice that is resting on your beliefs and your vision?
Yeah. And I mean, having Neptune and Saturn just having moved into your third house, it's really pushing into your attention. Um, just things to do with how you articulate, how you say the things you need to say, how you ask for what you need, how you stand up and make a statement. And there are some other meanings to the third house, which I'll also mention, but just let's just start with that one, which we've already been talking about. But this idea of like Neptune kind of brings in what isn't real. What are the belief systems that undergird your desire to speak? What are the things those structures that maybe you've learned from childhood, or these other things that kind of are the things that maybe even get in your way when you're speaking. Saturn is bringing in more like what is real about your voice. What do you really want to articulate? What truth do you want to bring through your voice? And having to kind of do the dance of the jockeying between Neptune and Saturn is so important here, and to really distinguishing, like at this moment, it's sort of like this idea of the spell breaking, where Saturn bangs into Neptune back in February, and really just kind of opens up the Pandora's box of what's real and what isn't. What do you need to really anchor your voice in? So I think there's something here too about there's a lot of lying in our society right now. There's a lot of BS all over the place, all just on social media and regular media, and there's a lot of propaganda. So I think part of the job of folks with Aquarius rising is to really distinguish between what's real and what isn't, what's a lie and what isn't. And it is one of the crucial questions of our time. So I really think that Aquarius rising, you're already a truth teller. That's Aquarius's job.
Mhm.
So you're really learning what's the difference. And then furthermore, you're speaking up about it and you're saying, okay, this over here is something that we're being sold a bill of goods and it's not real, and then this over here is what we need to lean into and what structures we need to build. So I see this as a very important March is a very important moment for Aquarius rising people to kind of start getting a handle on this process. And with Venus lighting it up, it's really digging into your own values and what drives your desire to believe somebody's voice and what doesn't, and then how do you want to react to that. And then the sun just kind of shines a light on all of it and just really just makes it clear, of course, depending how you're using it. But if you're desiring higher awareness, you're desiring to move into a higher state of consciousness, that's how you're using this.
Mhm.
Really trying to look at that, because ultimately you're going to be one of the truth tellers.
Right.
So what does that mean? What does that look like? It's a big responsibility. And also it's not always going to be clear. There's going to be times when you can't tell and you're not sure either. And that's going to be part of it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's, Saturn will be going through that area for 2.5 years or so. So there's a lot of learning over the next few years around how to use your voice. And I love that you brought up, yeah, the Aquarius rising, that the importance of the truth teller.
Yeah.
And yeah, so this is a fascinating process for you. And I think we're ready to move on to Pisces.
Yeah. For you
Mhm.
with Pisces rising, the second house at the deepest, most profound layer is your self-worth,
Mhm.
essentially your self-love, so there's something that's the very deepest layer. The second house being an extension of the first house in a way. But there are other layers. There is definitely layers about money and living in a capitalist society. There's a lot about money, how you spend your money, and your money expressing your values.
Mhm.
So actually, that's pretty much what those two are bringing. They're bringing what's real and what isn't. Saturn is reality. Neptune is oftentimes illusion. And those two crashing together, it's kind of breaking the spell and forcing you to look at the ideals you have around, finances, money, resources, and your self-worth. And then Saturn is bringing in and what you're actually capable of. What is your actual capacity uh, of those things for self-love and for financial issues. Those are very much the hot topics. So that's kind of the first part. But in March, there's still a lot of energy going on in Pisces. You've got in the beginning, you've got the sun, you've got Venus still there in the very beginning, Mercury retrograde, Mars. They're all hanging out in Pisces at some point during the month of March, and really placing the attention on yourself. So there's a lot of question here for Pisces rising around, are you nourishing yourself? Are you taking a step back to fill your cup? Because you're going to need it as a Pisces rising person. Are you giving yourself the compassion and the forgiveness that Pisces rising is capable of giving to others? Kind of looking at those topics. Are you letting yourself express grief? All those kinds of topics are going to be coming up. But once we get to March 6th, so early on in the month, Venus, who's represented by this red warrior goddess figure here, she goes into Aries and she immediately reaches Neptune and then Saturn. So, what Venus does by doing that, she's bringing your attention to your value system in general and kind of getting you to really dig into what is the motivating value that drives how you care for yourself, that drives how you spend your money? What is the motivating factor? She really brings that in and kind of, pokes at it and is like, you need to look at that. And then the sun does the same thing a little later in the month, on March 20th through the 25th. The sun does exactly the same thing. It goes in Aries and it just lights up this process that you're dealing with that has to do with you and how you value yourself. So, that's kind of like in a nutshell what's happening in this month, but there's more to talk about, which I'm going to digress and ask Laurie to take the lead there.
Well, I have kind of gotten stuck on this thought
Let me go.
about someone particular that I know who was born at the last Neptune Saturn conjunction
Mm,
and it has Pisces rising and is has spent their life working, their adult life working in finance.
mm,
And I just know that this person was brought up with a lot of spiritual focus around resources, actually. It's
mhm.
just fascinating. This just like
Yeah.
awareness came to me. And what this is about is waking up to what your, yeah, what your beliefs are around resources and around your own worth and what you're willing to, how you're willing to do the work to get it to match your beliefs or how you're the more negative side of this for all of us is, are we willing to cut ourselves off from our spiritual understanding, or are we going to do the work necessary to bring them together?
Hmm.
Right? Does that make sense how I just said that? I
Yes.
mean, there's
Yeah.
plenty of people that are going to do the opposite of what we're encouraging people to do, focus on doing the work necessary to bring our beliefs in line with what we need to do. And plenty of people that do just that, can work it the
Yeah.
opposite way and go down the darker path. But I think this is really, really interesting. Just the awakening, the necessity to understand what the vision is and what we're
No,
willing to do to support that vision in a healthy way.
yeah, because I think it's really easy for me just to spur off of what you were just saying. Like it's really easy to think about in a capitalist society, like the delusion and the
Right.
illusion of money. And if you're, let's say, if you're born into money, you're sort of stamped with successful the moment of your birth, even though you haven't done a thing.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of illusion around money and what kind of power money grants, but not necessarily, it's not necessarily for good. So I think this one really brings in a question of what is money and what it is not, and sort of with the Neptune Saturn, I mean, Neptune kind of getting at what's the illusion. And I would say here that it's the illusion of self-worth, that if you have a lot of money, then you're good with self-worth, and that's an illusion. Those are, they're connected, but they're different things. And
And
that you might also have a great deal of struggle with self-worth if you've been born into money, or vice versa, right? But
right.
just, I mean, in this case, I'm thinking about money being delusional about money, and that usually, in my point of view, is people who have far too much and think it's means all these things that it doesn't. And then
Right, but
Saturn
then
kind of
there's
zoom
people
out,
that have none and think that means that they're worthless.
right, exactly.
Really understanding, and this is exactly, I think, people with this placement really understanding what money really means.
Yeah.
The power of exchange. It's not, yeah, it's a very different story than what we were brought up to believe. And this is really something that needs to be looked at for people with Pisces rising. Huh,
Yeah, and I know,
fascinating.
and especially, sorry, been interrupting there.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, especially too, when overlaying the kind of the birth story, the idea that Saturn, Neptune are a new birth. So, in other words, what that says here is a new way of regarding yourself, a new way of a new beginning, as far as like how you see yourself handling your finances, how you see yourself as, being able to love yourself on a deep level, and accept yourself, and perhaps forgive yourself on a deeper level for whatever, because we all do things in life that we are like, oh God, did I really do that? So there's a need for forgiveness as well. And I think there's a birth moment between who you are as a self, and then how you kind of, are able to extend yourself that sense of love, because it really is the transition from Pisces to Aries is so stark, and it's all about ending one cycle and beginning another one. So here it's about really looking about how you regard yourself, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, how you regard yourself. Hmm. Yeah, I could go down 20 rabbit holes, but I think that's just a really interesting one, isn't it?
It really
Yeah.
is.
And what money means to people is a fascinating conversation. We should have a whole conversation about that. But I think we've said enough about people with
I think we
Pisces rising.
I think so too. So we'll stop sharing here and say
Okay.
thank you very much. Thanks for watching, and thank you, Laurie.
Thank you, Jenny. And we will, yeah, we'll do it again. Thank
Okay.
you.
All
Bye.
right.